Hey, stop what you're doing for just 1 second because I want to ask you something. When was the last time you had to write something in English? Something real, something that actually mattered, and you sat there staring at a blank page with absolutely no idea where to start? Maybe it was an email that turned into a 3-paragraph struggle. Maybe it was a school assignment. Or maybe it was a report at work, and you spent more time worrying about whether you were using the right words than actually writing the thing. If any of that sounds familiar, you're in exactly the right place today. Welcome to English in Advance. I'm Jessica, and this channel exists for one reason: to help you level up your English in a way that actually sticks. Not just grammar rules on a whiteboard, not just vocabulary lists you forget the next day. We work with real English, the kind of English you need when it counts. And today we are going all in on one of the most important skills you'll ever need at the B2 level: report writing. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Report writing? That sounds dry. That sounds like school. And honestly, I get it. But here's the thing. Once you understand how reports work in English, something really interesting happens. Your whole ability to communicate in formal and semi-formal situations just clicks. It's like suddenly having a map when you've been walking around lost. Everything starts to make more sense. Emails, presentations, professional conversations, job applications. All of it connects back to the logic of structured writing. So today is going to be long. It's going to be detailed. It's going to be packed with examples, practice moments, vocabulary, listening challenges, and real explanations that treat you like the smart adult learner that you are. We're going to work through this topic from the very beginning all the way to the level where you feel confident writing a real report in English yourself. Make sure you're somewhere comfortable. If you're commuting, perfect. This is your commute sorted. If you're studying at home, grab a notebook. And if you're a regular here on English in Advance, you already know how we do things. We go deep. We go slow, and we make sure you actually understand before we move on. If you're new, welcome. Hit subscribe because this is just the beginning. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the most basic question. What actually is a report? Because I think a lot of learners get confused between a report and an essay, or between a report and a letter. And the confusion makes everything harder than it needs to be. So here it is, in the simplest possible way. A report is a piece of writing that gives information about something that has happened, something that has been researched, or something that has been observed. It's written for a specific purpose. It's written for a specific reader. And it's organized in a clear, logical way so that the reader can find the information they need quickly and easily. That last part is actually the key to understanding reports. When you write an essay, you're usually making an argument or exploring an idea. When you write a letter, you're communicating something personal or professional to one specific person. But when you write a report, your main job is to give information clearly and usefully. You're not trying to impress anyone with beautiful language. You're not trying to be creative. You're trying to be clear, organized, and helpful. Think about it from the reader's perspective. Imagine your boss asks you to write a report about customer satisfaction at your company. She doesn't want to read a beautiful piece of prose about how customers feel. She wants to know what the data shows, what the problems are, what you recommend, and where she can find each piece of information without reading the whole document from start to finish. That's what a good report does. Now let me introduce you to 3 people who are going to help us learn throughout today's lesson. I want you to listen carefully when I describe them, because we're going to come back to them again and again throughout the script. First, there's Camille. Camille is 28 years old. She works at a marketing agency in London. She was born in France, and she's been living in England for 4 years. Her English is really good. She can hold conversations easily. She understands films and podcasts without too much trouble. But formal writing is still a challenge for her. She often says her reports sound too casual, like she's writing a message to a friend instead of a professional document. Then there's Daniel. Daniel is 34. He's from Colombia, and he works remotely for an international logistics company. His job involves a lot of written communication in English, emails, internal reports, summaries for his manager. He's at a solid B1 level, pushing into B2. His vocabulary is decent, but his reports tend to be a bit disorganized. He'll put a recommendation in the introduction, then repeat information he already said, and his conclusions are often vague and unconvincing. And finally, there's May. May is 22. She's from China, and she's currently studying at a university in Canada. She's studying business and management, and her professors regularly ask her to write reports as part of her coursework. Her grammar is actually excellent. Her problem is different. She tends to use very long, complicated sentences when shorter, clearer ones would work much better. She also struggles with knowing how formal to be and when. These 3 people are going to be our students throughout today's lesson. You're going to hear parts of their reports, you're going to see where they go wrong, and you're going to learn alongside them. Ready? Good. Let's keep going so you understand what a report is. Now let's talk about the different types of reports you might need to write at a B2 level in English, because not all reports are the same, and knowing which type you're dealing with helps you understand what to include and how to structure it. The first type is an informational report. This is the most basic kind. Its purpose is simply to share information. There's no argument, no recommendation, no analysis of what the data means. You're just presenting facts. For example, if your manager asks you to write a summary of how many customer complaints were received last month, what they were about, and when they happened, that's an informational report. You gather the facts, you organize them clearly, you present them. Done. Camille actually had to write one of these recently. Her boss asked her to put together a report on the performance of their social media accounts over the previous 3 months. How many followers did they gain? What kind of content performed best? How did engagement change over time? Camille's job was not to say what they should do differently, just to report the facts. And even that felt hard for her because she kept wanting to add her own opinions. We'll come back to Camille's version of this later and look at what she did well and what she needs to improve. The second type is an analytical report. This one goes further than just presenting facts. You gather information, yes, but then you also analyze it. You look for patterns, problems, causes, and connections. You try to explain why something happened, not just what happened. These reports are more complex and they require a higher level of language, but they're also very common at the B2 level and above, especially in academic and professional settings. The third type is a recommendation report. This is similar to an analytical report, but it has a very clear goal. By the end, you are going to tell the reader what they should do. You've looked at the situation, you've analyzed the options, and now you're making a professional recommendation. This is probably the most common type of report you'll be asked to write in a B2 English exam, like Cambridge, FCE, or CAE. Daniel struggles with this type. He has trouble clearly separating the analysis from the recommendation, and his suggestions often come across as vague. We'll fix that. The fourth type is a progress report. This is used when someone wants to know how a project or a task is going, what has been done, what still needs to happen. Are there any problems or delays? Progress reports are very common in workplaces, and they tend to be shorter and more focused than the other types. And finally, there's a feasibility report. This type looks at whether a particular idea or plan is possible and practical. Can we do this? Should we do this? What would it cost? What are the risks? May had to write one of these for a university assignment. Her task was to assess whether a local company should expand its services to a new city. She found this type incredibly difficult because it requires you to think critically and express uncertainty in English, which is actually one of the trickier things to do well. Okay, so now we have our 5 types. Don't worry about memorizing them right now. Just let them sit in your mind as we move forward because they're going to keep coming up. Now let's talk about structure. And this is where things get really practical, because even if your English is not perfect, a well-structured report immediately looks more professional and is much easier to read. Structure is one of the most powerful tools you have. Most reports in English follow a similar basic structure, with some variations depending on the type. Let me walk you through the standard structure, part by part, and explain what goes in each section. Let's start with the title. Every report needs a title, and the title should be clear, specific, and informative. It should tell the reader exactly what the report is about. Not just report on customers, but something like Customer Satisfaction Survey Results, Third Quarter 2024. Not just social media, but analysis of social media performance, January to March 2025. The title sets the expectation. It tells the reader what they're about to learn. Notice that report titles in English are often noun phrases. They don't have verbs. They describe. They don't tell a story. Analysis of, or report on, or investigation into. These are the kinds of phrases you'll see again and again. After the title, many reports include some basic information: who wrote the report, who it was written for, and when it was written. This is sometimes called the header information. In a professional setting, it might look like this: prepared by Camille Moreau, submitted to Head of Marketing, date March 14th, 2025. Simple, clean, direct. It tells the reader everything they need to know about context before they even start reading. Now, some longer reports also include what's called an executive summary or an abstract. This is a short overview, usually just 1 or 2 paragraphs, that summarizes the whole report. It tells the reader what the report is about, what findings it contains, and what recommendations it makes. The idea is that a busy person could read just the executive summary and get the essential information without reading the entire report. At a B2 level, you might not always need to include this, but knowing it exists and how it works is important. Then comes the introduction. This is where you set the scene. You tell the reader why this report was written, what it covers, and how it's organized. The introduction answers 3 key questions. What is this about? Why does it matter? And what will you find in this report? It should be relatively short, maybe 2 to 4 sentences in a shorter report, up to 2 paragraphs in a longer one. The introduction is not where you put your findings or your conclusions. Those come later. For now, you're just orienting the reader. Let me give you an example. Imagine Daniel is writing a report about delivery delays in his company. His introduction might read something like this. This report examines the causes of increased delivery delays experienced by the company during the fourth quarter of 2024. The data was gathered from internal logistics records and customer feedback forms. The report identifies 3 main contributing factors and concludes with a series of recommendations for improvement. That's it. Short, clear. Tells the reader exactly what's coming. Daniel's actual first draft didn't look anything like this. He started with something much more personal and informal, almost like a story. We'll look at how to fix that. After the introduction, you move into the main body. This is the longest part of the report, and it's where you actually present your findings, your analysis, or your information. Depending on the type of report you're writing, the body is usually divided into sections, and each section has a clear focus. In a formal report, each section often has a heading, a short title that tells the reader what that section is about. Headings are really useful because they help the reader navigate the document. Even if they don't read every word, they can scan the headings to find the information they need. The body of the report is where most of the work happens, and we're going to spend a lot of time on it in just a moment. But first, let me finish the overview of the structure. After the body comes the conclusion. This is where you pull everything together. You summarize the main things that came out of your research or analysis. You remind the reader of the most important points. You don't introduce any new information in the conclusion. Everything in the conclusion should be something you already mentioned in the body. The conclusion answers the question, what does all of this mean? And then, if it's appropriate for the type of report you're writing, you end with a recommendations section. This is where you tell the reader what action should be taken based on what you've found. Recommendations are usually written in a very direct, confident style. You're not asking permission. You're making a professional suggestion based on evidence. We'll look at exactly how to phrase recommendations in English because the language is quite specific. Finally, some reports include appendices at the very end. An appendix is where you put supporting materials, charts, tables, survey forms, data, anything that would interrupt the flow of the main report, but that the reader might want to refer to. In an exam context, you probably won't need appendices, but in a real workplace or academic setting, they're very common. So that's the full structure. Title, header information, possibly an executive summary, introduction, body with sections and headings, conclusion, recommendations, and possibly appendices. Let that sink in for a moment. Let's now zoom in on the body of the report, because this is where most learners, including Camille, Daniel, and May, run into the most trouble. The body is where you present your information. And the most important thing to understand about the body is that it needs to be organized logically. That means every section should flow naturally from the one before it, and there should be a clear reason why information appears where it does. One of the most common mistakes is what I call the scrambled egg approach. Everything gets mixed together. Facts, opinions, recommendations, background information, analysis, all thrown into the same paragraph without any clear order. The reader gets confused, they can't find the information they need, and the report feels messy and unprofessional, even if the ideas themselves are good. This was Daniel's exact problem in his first draft. So how do you organize the body well? There are a few strategies, and the best one depends on what type of information you're presenting. One common approach is to organize by topic. If your report covers 3 different issues, let's say customer complaints about delivery time, product quality, and customer service, you might have one section for each issue. Section 1 covers delivery time. Section 2 covers product quality. Section 3 covers customer service. Each section examines that topic from multiple angles: what the data shows, what the cause might be, what the impact is. Another approach is to organize by time. This works well for progress reports or any report that traces how something changed over time. You might have sections for different time periods: what happened in January, what changed in February, what the situation looks like in March. This structure helps the reader see development and change clearly. A third approach is to organize by importance. You start with the most significant finding and work your way down to the less important ones. This is useful when you have a lot of information and you want to make sure the most critical points don't get buried. And a fourth approach is to organize by cause and effect. First, you present the problem, then you explain what caused it. Or first, you present a situation, then you explain what happened as a result. This structure is very powerful in analytical reports because it naturally leads the reader toward your recommendations. Now, within each section of the body, you need to be careful about how you write your paragraphs. A strong paragraph in a report has a clear main idea, supporting evidence or details, and sometimes an explanation of what those details mean. Let's practice this right now. I want you to listen to 2 different versions of the same paragraph from a report, and I want you to notice the difference in quality. Ready? Version 1. The company had a lot of complaints last year. There were problems with delivery. Some customers were not happy. The feedback was bad. We need to do something about this. Version 2. Customer feedback collected during the 2024 annual survey revealed a significant increase in dissatisfaction with delivery times. Approximately 62% of respondents reported that their most recent order arrived later than expected, representing a 14% increase compared to the previous year. This trend suggests that current logistics processes may no longer be adequate to meet growing demand. Okay, same basic information, completely different quality. What's the difference? First, version 2 is specific. It uses numbers. 62%, 14%. Numbers are your friends in report writing. They make vague statements concrete and believable. A lot of complaints is vague. 62% of respondents is specific and professional. Second, version 2 uses formal vocabulary. Words like revealed, approximately, reported, representing, suggests, and adequate are all formal professional words. Version 1 uses very basic, informal vocabulary: had, a lot, bad, do something. That kind of language is fine in a conversation or a casual email, but it undermines the credibility of a report. Third, version 2 explains the significance of the finding. It doesn't just say what happened, it connects the data to a broader implication. This trend suggests that current logistics processes may no longer be adequate. That's analysis, not just description. That's what separates a good B2 report from a mediocre one. Now let's look at what May often does. Remember, her problem is different. She tends to write sentences that are too long and too complicated. Listen to this example from her first draft. Due to the fact that the results of the research, which was conducted by the team over a period of approximately 6 months, during which time numerous data points were collected from a variety of sources, including both primary and secondary data collection methods, seem to indicate a pattern which is consistent with previous findings from earlier studies that were carried out in similar contexts. It is therefore possible to conclude that the situation has not changed significantly since the previous report was published last year. Wow. Okay. Did you follow that? Maybe. But it required a lot of effort. And in a report, your job is to make things easy for the reader, not to demonstrate how complex your sentence structure is. Let me show you how May could rewrite that more clearly. The 6-month study drew on both primary and secondary data. The results are consistent with findings from earlier research in similar contexts. This suggests that the situation has not changed significantly since last year's report. 3 clear sentences instead of one confusing monster. The meaning is exactly the same. The language is still formal and professional, but it's so much easier to read. This is what B2 report writing should sound like. Clear, organized, and precise. Now let's talk about vocabulary, because this is one of the areas where learners make the most progress when they put in focused effort. Report writing in English has its own vocabulary. Once you start recognizing and using these words and phrases, your reports will immediately sound more professional. Let me go through several categories of useful report vocabulary with plenty of examples for each one. Let's start with verbs for presenting information. In a report, you need to describe what data shows, what research reveals, and what trends indicate. Here are some strong verbs for doing that. The survey indicates, the data reveals, the results suggest, the figures demonstrate, the research confirms, the analysis shows, the findings highlight, the statistics point to. Notice that most of these verbs are followed by either a noun phrase or a that clause. For example, the data reveals a significant decline in customer satisfaction, or the results suggest that current policies are insufficient. Practice using these verbs. They're versatile, professional, and extremely common in reports at B2 level and above. Now let's look at language for describing trends and changes. Reports often involve describing how something changed over time, or what direction something is moving in. For increases, you might say, there was a rise in, there was an increase in, the figures grew by, numbers climbed to, there was a surge in, demand went up by. For decreases, you might say, there was a decline in, the numbers fell by. There was a drop in, figures decreased by. There was a reduction in, the rate fell too. For things that stayed the same, you might say, levels remained stable, figures were largely unchanged. There was little variation in, the situation stayed consistent. You can also modify these phrases to describe how fast or how extreme the change was. A significant rise, a sharp decline, a gradual increase, a slight drop, a dramatic fall, a modest improvement, a steady growth. These modifiers add precision and nuance to your writing, which is exactly what B2 level language looks like. Let me give you a practice sentence right now. I'm going to give you some data, and I want you to pause for a moment and try to put it into a formal report sentence before I do it. Ready? Here's the data. In 2023, 45% of customers were satisfied with the service. In 2024, that number went up to 58%. Okay, pause if you want to try it yourself. Here's one way to express that. Customer satisfaction increased significantly between 2023 and 2024, rising from 45% to 58%. A gain of 13 percentage points over a single year. Nice. Specific, clear, uses formal vocabulary, tells a story with the data. Now let's look at language for explaining causes. In analytical and recommendation reports, you often need to explain why something happened. Here are some useful cause and effect phrases. This was caused by. This resulted from. One contributing factor was. A key reason for this is, this can be attributed to, this was due to, as a result of, consequently, therefore, this led to, this gave rise to. For example, the decline in sales can be attributed to increased competition from online retailers. Or, delays in delivery were largely due to understaffing in the distribution center. Consequently, customer satisfaction scores fell sharply during this period. See how the cause and effect language connects the information and creates a logical flow? That's exactly what good report writing does. It doesn't just present facts, it explains the relationships between them. Now, let's look at hedging language. This is something May needs to work on quite a lot, and it's actually one of the markers of advanced English. Hedging means expressing uncertainty or caution. In a report, you don't always know everything for certain. Sometimes the data is inconclusive. Sometimes there are multiple possible explanations. When this is the case, you should signal that uncertainty in your language. This makes your writing more accurate, more honest, and actually more credible. Common hedging expressions include, it appears that, it seems that, this may suggest, it is possible that, it is likely that, the evidence indicates, this could be due to, it is worth noting, that, further research would be needed to confirm. These phrases say, in effect, I'm being honest. This is what the evidence points to, but I'm not making a claim I can't fully support. Compare these two sentences. The new marketing strategy caused a 20% increase in website traffic versus the new marketing strategy appears to have contributed to a 20% increase in website traffic during this period. The second version is more careful, more honest, and actually sounds more professional because of it. This is something native speakers of formal English do all the time, and it's a key feature of B2 plus writing. Let me now give you an extended listening exercise. I'm going to read you a section from a report that Daniel drafted, his recommendation report about delivery delays at his company. I want you to listen carefully. As you listen, think about these 3 questions. First, is the language formal enough? Second, is the information presented clearly and logically? Third, are there any specific words or phrases that seem out of place or unclear? Listen. Dear management team, I am writing this report to tell you about our delivery problems. Last year, we had so many issues and the clients were very upset. I think the main problem is that we don't have enough drivers and the warehouse is too small. Also, the software we use is old and doesn't work well. My recommendation is that we should hire more drivers, get a bigger warehouse, and update our software. I think this will make things better. I hope this report is helpful, and I am happy to discuss it with you anytime. Thank you for reading, Daniel. Okay, let's talk. There are several issues here, and I want to be fair to Daniel. This is a very common first draft for someone at his level, and the good news is that every single problem is fixable. Let me go through them one by one. First, the opening, Dear Management Team. This is a letter greeting, not a report heading. Reports don't start with Dear. They start with a title, and sometimes header information, and then a section heading for the introduction. Using Dear immediately signals to the reader that you're not quite sure which genre you're writing in. Second, I am writing this report to tell you about our delivery problems. This is a very informal way to open a report. Compare it with what we saw earlier. This report examines the causes of increased delivery delays. One sounds like a person who is nervous and not quite sure what to say. The other sounds confident, professional, and organized. Third, we had so many issues and the clients were very upset. This is far too vague and informal. So many. How many? What kind of issues? How upset were the clients? How do we know? A professional report would use specific data here. It would say something like, customer complaints related to delivery increased by 34% in the fourth quarter of 2024, with 78% of complaints citing late arrival as the primary issue. Fourth, I think the main problem is using I think in the body of a report weakens your point. In report writing, you present findings as if they're based on evidence, not personal opinion. Instead of, I think the main problem is, you might say, the evidence suggests that the primary issue is, or analysis of the data indicates that the central challenge is. Fifth, my recommendation is that we should hire more drivers, get a bigger warehouse, and update our software. The recommendations themselves are reasonable, but the way they're expressed is too vague and too casual. What does update our software mean exactly? How many drivers should be hired? By when? What kind of warehouse do you need? Good recommendations are specific, actionable, and connected to the evidence you've presented. Sixth, I think this will make things better. This is far too vague as a concluding statement for a recommendation. How will it make things better? What outcome can the management team expect? By how much? Over what time period? Conclusions and recommendations should be connected to evidence. And finally, I hope this report is helpful and I am happy to discuss it with you anytime. Thank you for reading, Daniel. Again, this is a letter closing, not a report ending. Reports don't end with, thank you for reading. They end with the conclusion section, and sometimes a recommendations section, and that's it. So now let's hear what Daniel's revised, improved version could look like for just one part of that report, the introduction. Remember, we're not going to fix the entire thing right now, but let's hear a much better version of just the introduction. This report was prepared in response to a request from the management team to investigate the causes of increased delivery delays experienced during the fourth quarter of 2024. Data was gathered from internal logistics records, driver reports, and a customer feedback survey conducted in January 2025. The report identifies 3 primary causes of the delays and concludes with a set of actionable recommendations for consideration. Yes, that's a completely different quality. Notice that Daniel's name doesn't appear in the introduction. In the header, yes, but not in the body of the text. Notice the passive voice. Was prepared, was gathered, which is very common in formal report writing because it sounds more objective, less personal. Notice the language is specific. Third quarter of 2024, 3 primary causes, actionable recommendations, and notice the structure. It tells the reader why the report was written, how the information was gathered, and what they'll find inside. That's a strong introduction. Let's talk about something that confuses many learners at this level, and that's the question of when to use the passive voice in reports and when not to. Because you've probably heard teachers say, avoid the passive in general writing, and then suddenly you're reading formal reports and the passive voice is everywhere. What's going on? Here's the answer. The passive voice is used in report writing, intentionally and correctly, for several specific reasons. The first reason is to sound more objective. When you're reporting findings, you want the focus to be on the information, not on yourself. Instead of, I found that 62% of customers were dissatisfied, you write, it was found that 62% of customers were dissatisfied. The finding is what matters, not who made it. The second reason is to describe processes without identifying who performed them. Data was collected using online survey forms. Interviews were conducted with 15 employees. We don't need to say who collected the data or who conducted the interviews. What matters is that it happened. The third reason is that it's the convention. In formal reports, the passive voice signals that you understand the genre. It's a register marker. It says, I know how formal English works. But, and this is important, not everything in a report should be passive. Your recommendations, for example, are often better in the active voice. The company should consider expanding its delivery fleet. Management is advised to review current staffing levels. These are direct and clear. The active voice in recommendations gives them energy and authority. And in your analysis section, mixing active and passive often works well. The survey revealed a sharp decline in customer satisfaction. This decline can be attributed to delays in the delivery process, which were caused by a shortage of drivers in the northern region. See how the passive and active alternate naturally? That's what good formal writing sounds like. Let's practice this right now. I'm going to give you 3 sentences in casual active language. Your job is to think about how you'd make them more formal, possibly using the passive where appropriate. Don't worry about being perfect. Just try. Sentence 1. We asked 200 customers about their experience. How would you make this more formal? A possible version. A survey was administered to 200 customers regarding their experience. Or, 200 customers were surveyed about their experience with the service. Sentence 2. I noticed that sales dropped by 20% in March. How would you make this more formal? A possible version. A 20% decline in sales was recorded during March. Or, sales figures indicate a drop of approximately 20% in the month of March. Sentence 3. We recommend that they hire more staff. More formal version. It is recommended that staffing levels be increased. Or, the company is advised to consider expanding its workforce in this area. Good. Now, can you see how the same information sounds completely different depending on how you express it? The language you choose shapes how professional and credible your report sounds. It matters enormously. Now I want to spend some time on something that every B2 learner needs to work on, and that's making their reports cohesive. Cohesion is the quality that makes a text feel connected and flow smoothly from one idea to the next. When a report lacks cohesion, it feels like a list of disconnected facts. When it has strong cohesion, it reads like a well-constructed argument where every sentence leads naturally to the next. How do you create cohesion in a report? There are three main tools: linking words and phrases, reference words, and consistent use of terminology. Let's start with linking words. These are the words and phrases that connect your ideas. For adding information, you might use furthermore, in addition, moreover, additionally. For contrasting information, you might use however, nevertheless, on the other hand, despite this, in contrast, although. For showing cause and effect, you might use therefore, as a result, consequently, this led to, this suggests that. For giving examples, you might use for instance, for example, as illustrated by, such as to demonstrate this. For summarizing or concluding, you might use in summary, in conclusion, overall, to sum up. It can therefore be concluded that. Now here's a mistake that many learners make. They use these words too randomly without thinking about whether the relationship they're expressing actually matches the meaning of the sentence. If you use however to introduce information that isn't actually a contrast, the reader gets confused. If you use therefore to introduce something that isn't actually a logical consequence, the report loses credibility. So when you use a linking word, always ask yourself, is this relationship actually true? Is this really an addition? Is this really a contrast? Is this really a result? If yes, use the word. If not, find a different one. Let me give you an example of a paragraph with weak cohesion and then the same paragraph with strong cohesion. Weak version, customer satisfaction decreased. We hired new staff. The warehouse expanded. Complaints fell in the second quarter. This reads like a shopping list. There's no connection, no flow. The reader can't see how these facts relate to each other. Strong version. Customer satisfaction declined significantly in the first quarter, prompting the management team to take corrective action. As a result, additional staff were recruited and the warehouse facility was expanded to increase capacity. These measures proved effective. By the second quarter, the number of customer complaints had fallen noticeably. Same information, completely different reading experience. The linking words and phrases, prompting. As a result, these measures proved effective. By the second quarter, create a sense of logical flow. The reader understands not just what happened, but how and why things are connected. The second cohesion tool is reference words. Reference words point back to something you've already mentioned, so you don't have to repeat it. Words like this, these, it, they, such, the former, the latter. Used well, they make your writing more elegant and less repetitive. Used badly, they create confusion because the reader isn't sure what the reference word is pointing to. The rule is simple. When you use a reference word, make sure it's completely clear what it refers to. If there's any doubt, use the actual noun instead. For example, the company introduced a new delivery tracking system in March. This was well received by customers. The word this clearly refers to the new delivery tracking system, clear and clean. But the company introduced a new delivery tracking system and updated its customer service procedures in March. This was well received by customers. Now this is ambiguous. Does it refer to the tracking system, the updated procedures, or both? In this case, you should be more specific. Both changes were well received by customers. Or, the tracking system, in particular, was well received by customers. The third cohesion tool is consistent terminology. In a report, if you call something a customer satisfaction survey at the beginning, don't call it a feedback form in the middle, and a questionnaire at the end. Pick one term and stick to it. This consistency helps the reader follow your argument without confusion. This might sound like a small thing, but it actually has a big impact. When readers encounter different terms for the same thing, they start to wonder, are these actually the same thing? Is there a difference I'm missing? That doubt interrupts the reading experience and distracts from your content. Let me now give you an extended practice passage. This is a full section from a B2 report, specifically the findings section of an analytical report on workplace well-being. I want you to listen to it carefully, as if it's a genuine document. Listen for the features we've been discussing: formal vocabulary, clear structure, hedging language, cause and effect, cohesion. After the passage, I'll ask you some comprehension questions. Here is the passage. The findings of this workplace well-being survey reveal several areas of concern that warrant the immediate attention of senior management. The data was collected from 340 employees across 4 departments between October and December of the previous year. The most significant finding relates to workload. A substantial majority of respondents, 74%, reported feeling that their workload was excessive. Of these, 61% stated that they regularly worked beyond their contracted hours, with 28% doing so on a daily basis. These figures represent a marked increase compared with the previous year's survey, in which 54% of employees reported feeling overloaded. The second key area of concern is communication. When asked whether they felt adequately informed about changes within the organization, only 38% of employees responded positively. The majority, 57%, indicated that they felt poorly informed about decisions that directly affected their work. Several respondents noted that information tended to reach them through informal channels, such as conversations with colleagues, rather than through official communications from management. The third finding concerns support structures. While 81% of respondents confirmed that they were aware of the company's employee assistance program, only 22% stated that they had made use of it. When asked why, the most common responses cited a perceived stigma around seeking help, concern about confidentiality, and limited awareness of what the program offered in practical terms. It is worth noting that these 3 areas, workload, communication, and support, appear to be interconnected. Employees who reported high workload were also significantly more likely to report feeling poorly informed and less likely to engage with support services. This pattern suggests that addressing workload pressures in isolation may be insufficient. A more holistic approach to employee well-being may be required. Good. Now let me ask you some comprehension questions. Try to answer each one in your head before I give you the answer. Question 1. What percentage of employees reported working beyond their contracted hours on a daily basis? Take a moment. The answer is 28%. The passage says 28% doing so on a daily basis. Question 2. How did the current workload figures compare with last year's survey? The answer is that they represent an increase. Last year, 54% of employees felt overloaded. This year, 74% do. A significant increase of 20 percentage points. Question 3. Why did most employees not use the Employee Assistance Program despite knowing it existed? The answer contains 3 reasons: a perceived stigma around seeking help, concerns about confidentiality, and limited awareness of what the program actually offered. Question 4. What does the report suggest about the 3 areas of concern? It suggests they are interconnected. Employees with high workloads were more likely to also report communication problems and to avoid using support services. Question 5. This one is a language question. Find an example of hedging language in the passage. There are several. It appears. It is worth noting. This pattern suggests, may be insufficient, may be required. All of these are examples of the writer being careful not to make claims beyond what the evidence supports. How did you do? If you got most of those right, you are absolutely tracking at B2 level. If some of them were difficult, that's fine. That's why we're here. Let's keep going. Now I want to walk you through the language of recommendations. This is one of the most specific and distinct features of report writing, and learners often get it wrong in exams because they use the wrong modal verbs or the wrong grammatical structures. Recommendations in English reports are typically expressed in a few standard ways. Let me give you the main structures and then we'll look at lots of examples. Structure 1. It is recommended that. Followed by the subjunctive. For example, it is recommended that the company introduce a flexible working policy. Notice the verb introduce, no s, no to, no ing. This is the subjunctive mood, and it's used after recommended that, advised that, suggested that, and proposed that. This is a formal structure, and it's very common in professional and academic reports. Structure 2. The company/management/team should, followed by the base verb. For example, management should review current staffing levels before the end of the quarter. This is slightly less formal than the subjunctive structure, but it's still very appropriate in most report contexts. Structure 3. It is advisable to, followed by the infinitive. For example, it is advisable to conduct a follow-up survey in the second quarter to track progress. This sounds authoritative without being too direct. Structure 4. The company/team is advised to, followed by the infinitive. For example, staff are advised to complete the updated training program by March. Again, formal and clear. Structure 5. We strongly recommend. This one is a little more direct and is often used when there's urgency. For example, we strongly recommend that management address the issue of workload before the end of the financial year. Now let's look at how to make recommendations more specific and effective. A weak recommendation just states what should happen. A strong recommendation explains what should happen, why, how, and sometimes when. Weak recommendation, the company should improve communication. Strong recommendation, it is recommended that the company establish a regular monthly communication briefing for all employees. This would address the finding that 57% of staff feel poorly informed about organizational changes, and it is expected to improve both employee engagement and overall job satisfaction. Do you see the difference? The strong version tells the reader what to do, connects it to specific evidence from the report, and anticipates the expected outcome. That's the level of detail you should aim for at B2 and above. Let me give you a practice exercise. I'm going to give you a finding from a report, and I want you to think about what recommendation you would make. Don't worry about writing it perfectly. Just think about it. Finding. A survey of 150 university students found that 68% felt they did not receive enough feedback on their written assignments. Of these, 82% said that receiving more detailed comments would help them improve their work. What would you recommend? Take a moment. Here's one possible recommendation. It is recommended that lecturers be provided with clear guidelines on the minimum standard for written feedback on assignments. It is further suggested that all written feedback include at least one specific strength and one actionable area for improvement. These measures are expected to address the significant gap between the feedback students currently receive and the level of detail they require to make genuine progress in their academic writing. Good. That recommendation is specific, evidence-based, practical, and it anticipates outcomes. That's what we're aiming for. Let me now revisit Camille because I promised we'd come back to her. Remember, her challenge is that her writing sounds too casual and personal, like a text message rather than a professional document. Let me read you a section from her original social media performance report, and then we'll look at how to fix it. Original version from Camille. Okay, so in terms of our social media, I think we did pretty well in some areas, but not so great in others. Instagram was really popular this quarter, and we got a lot of new followers, which is great. But our Twitter didn't really do much. Honestly, the content we were posting there was maybe a bit boring. I think we should post more interesting stuff and maybe use more images. Facebook was kind of in the middle. Oh, Camille. We love you, but this needs work. Let me count the issues. Okay, so that's a verbal tick. Great for conversation, terrible for a report. Pretty well. Not so great. Far too vague and informal, which is great. This is editorial, not analytical. Didn't really do much. What does that mean specifically? Honestly. This makes it sound like she wasn't being honest before. Maybe a bit boring, speculative and casual. More interesting stuff. What does stuff mean in a professional context? Kind of in the middle. Again, what does this actually mean in data terms? Let me show you what a revised version of this section could look like. Instagram demonstrated the strongest performance of the 3 platforms during the first quarter. The account gained 2,400 new followers, representing a 22% increase compared with the same period last year. Engagement rates remained consistently above the industry average throughout the quarter. Twitter performance, by contrast, was considerably weaker. Reach declined by 18%, and the engagement rate fell to 0.8%. Significantly below the platform's standard benchmark of 1.5%. An analysis of content suggests that a heavy reliance on text-based posts may have contributed to this underperformance, as visual content has been shown to generate substantially higher engagement on this platform. Facebook results were mixed. Follower growth was modest, approximately 4%, but video content performed particularly well, generating engagement rates of up to 3.2% on individual posts. Now that is a professional social media report. Same basic information as Camille's first draft, but expressed in a way that is specific, formal, objective, and evidence-based. Camille can write like this. She has the knowledge and the intelligence. She just needed to switch into a different register, and that's a skill you can practice and develop. Let's shift our focus a little and talk about something that applies to all 3 of our learners, Camille, Daniel, and May. And that's the question of register. Because register is one of the most important concepts in advanced English, and it's something that even B2 learners sometimes struggle to fully grasp. Register in English basically means the level of formality you use in a particular situation. You speak differently to your boss than you do to your best friend. You write differently in a text message than you do in a formal email. You use different language in a casual blog post than you do in an academic essay. These differences in language, in vocabulary, in grammar, in tone, are what we mean by register. Report writing sits firmly in the formal register. That means there are certain things you should avoid and certain things you should include. Things to avoid in formal report writing: contractions. Don't write don't, can't, it's there. Write the full forms instead: do not, cannot, it is, they are. Informal vocabulary. Avoid a lot: big, stuff, thing, kind of, sort of, pretty. Okay? Nice, bad, good. Replace these with more precise formal alternatives. Rhetorical questions. Avoid, so what can we do? Or, but why did this happen? Reports make statements and draw conclusions. They don't ask the reader questions. First person, while not completely banned in reports, excessive use of I think, I believe, in my opinion, is considered too personal and informal. The evidence should speak for itself. Things to include in formal report writing: precise vocabulary, significant, substantial, negligible, considerable, moderate, marginally, predominantly. Full verb forms and no contractions, passive voice where appropriate, impersonal sentence structures. It was found that, it is recommended that, it can be concluded that. Specific figures and data wherever possible, formal linking words. Furthermore, nevertheless, consequently, in addition, however. Here's a really practical exercise. I'm going to read you a list of informal phrases. After each one, try to think of the more formal equivalent before I give it to you. Informal: we found out. Formal: it was established that, or the investigation revealed. Informal: we asked people. Formal: respondents were surveyed, or participants were interviewed. Informal: things got worse. Formal: the situation deteriorated, or performance declined significantly. Informal: we think this happened because. Formal: this can be attributed to, or analysis indicates that the primary cause was. Informal: it's a big problem. Formal: this represents a significant challenge, or this issue is of considerable concern. Informal: we need to fix this. Formal: immediate action is required, or it is recommended that corrective measures be implemented. Informal: the results were good. Formal: the outcomes were largely positive, or the results indicated a marked improvement. Do you see the pattern? In formal English, we tend to use longer, more precise words. We avoid shorthand and casual expressions. We name things specifically rather than using vague terms like things or stuff. And we use structures that emphasize objectivity. Passive voice, impersonal constructions, evidence-based language. This isn't about being pretentious or complicated. It's about using the right tool for the job. When your boss reads your report, she needs to be able to trust that what she's reading is objective, evidence-based, and professionally presented. The formal register is what signals those qualities. Let me now give you a second extended listening passage. This time, it's a complete recommendations section from a report on a university's international student support services. This section follows from findings that showed international students were struggling to access support in their first semester. Listen carefully. After the passage, we'll discuss it. Here is the recommendations section. Based on the findings outlined in the previous section, the following recommendations are presented for the consideration of the university's International Student Support Committee. First, it is recommended that a dedicated welcome program be introduced for all incoming international students. This program should begin no later than 1 week before the academic year commences and should include orientation sessions covering practical matters such as accommodation, transport, healthcare registration, and banking. It is expected that this measure would significantly reduce the feelings of isolation and disorientation that were reported by 69% of first-year international students in the current survey. Second, it is strongly advised that the university appoint a minimum of 3 additional specialist advisors with experience in international student welfare. At present, a single advisor is responsible for the support needs of over 400 international students, a ratio that is widely considered insufficient by sector standards. An increase in staffing would enable more timely and personalized support to be provided. Third, the committee is encouraged to explore the development of a peer mentoring scheme, in which experienced international students are paired with new arrivals. Evidence from comparable institutions suggests that peer support can be highly effective in helping new students to navigate both academic and social challenges in their first semester. It is proposed that participation in the scheme be incentivized through a small credits-based reward system. Finally, it is recommended that the university conduct a follow-up survey at the end of the spring semester to assess the impact of any changes implemented as a result of this report. This will ensure that progress can be measured and that further adjustments can be made if necessary. Good. Let's talk about that passage. Did you notice the way the recommendations were numbered and ordered? This is a very common and effective structure. Each recommendation starts with first, second, third, finally. It creates clear separation between the points and makes it easy for the reader to follow. It also signals that these are distinct, actionable steps, not vague suggestions. Did you notice the use of passive and modal structures? It is recommended that, it is strongly advised that, the committee is encouraged to, it is proposed that. These are all impersonal, formal ways of making recommendations. None of them say, I think or you should. They sound objective and professional. Did you notice how each recommendation is connected to specific evidence from the findings? 69% of first-year international students. A single advisor is responsible for over 400 international students. Evidence from comparable institutions. The recommendations don't come out of nowhere. They're grounded in the data. And did you notice the final recommendation about the follow-up survey? This is something that strong reports often include. A plan for evaluation. It shows that the writer is thinking beyond just making recommendations and is also thinking about how to know whether those recommendations worked. This is a sign of genuine analytical thinking. Now, I want to spend some time on something that many learners overlook, but that really matters in B2 level report writing, and that's sentence variety. Good report writing doesn't use the same sentence structure over and over again. It varies, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. sometimes complex clauses, sometimes simple and direct. This variety keeps the reader engaged and also demonstrates a higher level of language control. One problem I see a lot, and May is a great example of this, is that learners sometimes think longer sentences automatically sound more academic or professional. But that's not true. A very long, complicated sentence can actually obscure your meaning and make the reader work too hard. Some of the most effective sentences in professional reports are short and punchy. Let me show you what sentence variety looks like in a well-written paragraph. Customer retention fell sharply in the third quarter. This was unexpected, given the strong performance recorded in the first half of the year. An analysis of the data suggests two possible explanations. First, the introduction of a competitor's loyalty scheme in July appears to have drawn away a significant portion of price-sensitive customers. Second, and perhaps more fundamentally, feedback collected from departing customers indicates that product quality had been declining gradually over the preceding 6 months, a concern that was not adequately addressed by the company at the time. Both factors are likely to have contributed to the decline, and both require urgent attention. Count the sentences. There are 7. The first sentence is very short, just 8 words, then a slightly longer sentence, then a short one again. An analysis of the data suggests 2 possible explanations, then 2 medium-length sentences introducing the 2 factors, then a long, detailed sentence, then a short, direct conclusion. Both factors are likely to have contributed to the decline, and both require urgent attention. That rhythm, short, medium, medium, short, medium, long, short, creates a reading experience that feels natural, professional, and easy to follow. It's not random. It's the result of a writer who knows how to control their sentences. Practice this. When you're writing a report, occasionally stop and count the words in your sentences. If every sentence is roughly the same length, try to vary it. Add a short, punchy statement. Then follow it with more detail. Break it up. Let's talk about one more important skill: writing a strong conclusion. This is something that learners often rush through, treating it as an afterthought. But a strong conclusion actually ties the entire report together and leaves the reader with a clear sense of what the report means and what needs to happen next. The conclusion of a report should do 3 things. First, it should summarize the main findings. Briefly, not in great detail, because the detail is already in the body. Second, it should answer the research question or address the purpose stated in the introduction. If the report was written to investigate the causes of delivery delays, the conclusion should clearly state what those causes are. And third, it should point forward, toward the recommendations or toward further action or toward the next steps. What the conclusion should not do is introduce new information. If something wasn't already in the body of the report, it has no place in the conclusion. The conclusion is a synthesis, not a new chapter. Let me give you a weak conclusion and a strong conclusion for the same report, and you can hear the difference yourself. Weak conclusion. In conclusion, this report has looked at the issues with delivery at our company. There are several problems and they need to be fixed. We hope that management will read the recommendations carefully. Overall, things need to improve. Strong conclusion. In conclusion, the evidence gathered for this report points to 3 interconnected causes of the recent increase in delivery delays: a shortage of qualified drivers in the northern region, the continued use of outdated logistics software, and insufficient warehouse capacity during peak periods. Each of these issues is addressable, and the measures recommended in the following section have the potential to reduce delivery delays by an estimated 30 to 40% within 6 months of implementation. However, it is important to note that lasting improvement will require a coordinated response. Addressing any single factor in isolation is unlikely to produce the sustained results that the company requires. See the difference? The strong conclusion is specific. It names the 3 causes. It connects back to the purpose of the report. It previews the recommendations. It uses hedging language. The potential to reduce, estimated 30 to 40%, unlikely to produce. And it ends with a note of nuance. Addressing one thing alone won't be enough. You need a coordinated response. That's sophisticated professional thinking expressed in clear, accessible language. Before we move into our final practice section, let me give you a summary of the most important vocabulary and structures we've covered today. Think of this as your B2 report writing toolkit. For presenting findings, the data reveals, the survey indicates, the findings show, the evidence suggests, the results demonstrate. It was found that, it has been observed that. For describing changes, increased significantly, declined sharply, remained stable, fell by approximately, rose to, experienced a notable decrease, showed a modest improvement. For explaining cause and effect, this can be attributed to, this resulted from as a result. Consequently, this led to, a contributing factor was, one explanation for this is, for hedging. It appears that, it seems likely that this suggests, it is possible that the evidence points to, further research may be needed. For recommendations, it is recommended that, it is advised that, the organization should, it is proposed that, it would be beneficial to, the following measures are suggested. For conclusions, in summary, in conclusion, overall to conclude, it can therefore be concluded that the evidence presented in this report demonstrates. For cohesion. Furthermore, in addition, however, nevertheless, despite this, as a result, therefore. This suggests, on the other hand, in contrast, for example, as illustrated by. Keep this list. Come back to it when you're writing your next report. Use these phrases not because they make you sound clever, but because they make your meaning clearer, more precise, and easier for the reader to follow. Okay, now for our final extended practice. I'm going to read you a complete short report on a topic that should be accessible and familiar. Employee satisfaction in a small retail company. This is a realistic B2 level report in full. Listen to the whole thing. After I finish, I'll give you a set of comprehension and language questions. Here is the report. Report on Employee Satisfaction, Riverside Retail Limited. Prepared by Sophie Harrison, HR Coordinator. Submitted to Board of Directors date, February 28, 2025. Introduction. This report was commissioned by the Board of Directors of Riverside Retail Limited to investigate the current levels of employee satisfaction across the company's 3 store locations. The findings are based on an anonymous survey completed by 87% of the workforce, 142 out of a possible 163 employees, during February 2025, as well as follow-up interviews conducted with 7 team leaders. The report identifies 4 primary areas of concern and concludes with a set of targeted recommendations. Findings. Overall satisfaction. The survey results indicate a moderate level of overall satisfaction among employees, with an average satisfaction score of 6.1 out of 10. While this represents an improvement on last year's figure of 5.6, it remains below the retail sector average of 6.8, suggesting that there is still significant room for improvement. Pay and benefits. This was identified as the area of greatest dissatisfaction. 78% of respondents rated their pay as inadequate, and 64% stated that the company's benefits package, which currently includes only statutory holiday entitlement and a staff discount, does not meet their needs. Several employees noted in open-ended responses that comparable retailers in the area offer pension contributions and enhanced maternity and paternity leave. Communication and management. Communication was highlighted as a key concern by 61% of respondents. Employees reported feeling uninformed about decisions affecting their working conditions, including recent changes to shift patterns and the introduction of a new performance management system. Follow-up interviews with team leaders revealed that they, too, felt inadequately briefed by senior management before changes were implemented. Career development. 55% of respondents indicated that they did not feel there were sufficient opportunities for progression within the company. Of these, 72% stated that this was a significant factor in their decision about whether to continue working for Riverside Retail in the coming year. This is a particularly concerning finding in light of the company's current 34% annual staff turnover rate. Physical working environment. While this was the least pressing area of concern overall, 41% of employees at the High Street branch reported that the staff room facilities were inadequate, specifically citing a lack of adequate seating and poor ventilation. This was not reported as an issue at the two other locations. Recommendations. Based on the findings outlined above, the following recommendations are submitted for the consideration of the board. It is recommended that the company conduct a comprehensive pay review before the end of the second quarter of this year. This review should benchmark Riverside Retail's pay scales against competitors in the local area and should identify areas where adjustments are required to remain competitive. It is further recommended that the benefits package be enhanced to include, at a minimum, a company pension scheme. This measure is expected to improve both recruitment outcomes and long-term retention rates. With regard to communication, it is proposed that a regular briefing system be introduced for team leaders, ensuring that they receive advance notice of operational changes before these are communicated to the wider workforce. This would address the gap in communication identified by both employees and team leaders in this survey. In relation to career development, it is advised that the company introduce a structured development program for all employees who have been with the company for 6 months or more. This program should include regular appraisals with clear progression criteria and access to funded external training where relevant. Finally, it is recommended that the board commission a review of the facilities at the High Street branch with a view to improving the staff room by the end of the summer. This is a low-cost measure that has the potential to significantly improve the working experience for employees at that location. Conclusion. The survey findings presented in this report indicate that while employee satisfaction at Riverside Retail Limited has improved marginally since last year, it remains below the industry average in several important respects. The areas of pay, communication, career development, and physical environment each represent actionable opportunities for improvement. It is anticipated that the implementation of the recommendations set out above would contribute to a meaningful improvement in employee satisfaction, a reduction in the company's high staff turnover rate, and ultimately, a stronger and more committed workforce. End of report. Okay, excellent. Now let's go through some questions. Question 1. What percentage of the total workforce completed the survey? The answer is 87%. 142 out of 163 employees. Question 2. How did the company's overall satisfaction score compare to the industry average? The company's score was 6.1, which was an improvement on last year's 5.6, but still below the retail sector average of 6.8. Question 3. What was the most dissatisfying area for employees? Pay and benefits, with 78% rating their pay as inadequate. Question 4. What specific issue was reported only at the High Street branch? The inadequacy of staff room facilities, specifically a lack of seating and poor ventilation. Question 5. What does the report say about staff turnover? The annual turnover rate is 34%, and 72% of employees who feel there are no career development opportunities cited this as a factor in whether they'd stay with the company. Question 6. Language question. Find an example of the subjunctive in the recommendations section. One example. It is recommended that the company conduct a comprehensive pay review. The verb conduct is in the subjunctive form, not conducts, not to conduct, just conduct. Question 7. Language question. Find an example of hedging language in the report. Several examples. It remains below the retail sector average, suggesting that there is still significant room for improvement. The word suggesting hedges the conclusion. Also, this is expected to improve recruitment outcomes. Expected is a hedge, and it is anticipated that the implementation of the recommendations would contribute to a meaningful improvement. Both anticipated and would are hedging. How did you do? If you got 5 or more right, you are tracking this material really well. If you found it challenging, go back and listen again. This kind of repeated listening is exactly how your comprehension improves over time. We're coming toward the end of today's lesson, but before we wrap up, I want to give you some practical advice on how to actually practice report writing in English between now and the next time we work together. The first thing I recommend is reading real reports. This sounds obvious, but not enough learners actually do it. Go online and search for annual reports, environmental reports, survey reports, or any kind of formal report in English. Read them not just for the content, but for the language. Notice how they structure their sentences. Notice which vocabulary they use. Notice how they express recommendations and conclusions. Your brain absorbs patterns when you expose it to good examples. The second thing is to practice rewriting. Take a paragraph from a report and try to rewrite it more formally or more clearly or with better cohesion. Or take a paragraph from your own casual writing, an email, a message, and try to make it sound like a report. This kind of transformation practice is one of the most effective ways to develop register awareness. The third thing is to practice with prompts. Pick a topic you know something about, your job, your studies, your town, a problem you've noticed, and try to write a short report on it, even just 200 words. Use the structures we've practiced today. Use the vocabulary. Use the passive where appropriate. Use hedging language. Don't worry if it's not perfect. The goal is to practice, not to produce perfection on the first try. And the fourth thing, come back to this channel. We have more content like this. We work through real language, real tasks, real challenges. We don't just talk about English in theory, we practice it. And the more you practice in an engaged, focused way, like you've been doing today, the faster your level improves. Let's bring Camille, Daniel, and May back one last time. We've learned a lot today, and I want to think about what the most important lesson is for each of them. For Camille, the biggest lesson is about register. She knows the content. She has the ideas. But she needs to learn to switch off the casual, personal voice and switch on the professional, objective voice. The way she thinks about it is actually quite helpful. She imagines she's writing for a person she's never met, someone who wants clear information and doesn't need to know how she feels about it. That mental shift makes a real difference. For Daniel, the most important lesson is about structure. His ideas are often solid, but they need to be organized much more clearly. Before he writes, he now makes a quick plan. What goes in the introduction? What are the 3 or 4 main findings? What are the recommendations? What goes in the conclusion? Once that structure is clear in his head, the writing itself becomes much easier. For May, the most important lesson is about clarity over complexity. She now reminds herself before writing, if in doubt, use 2 simple sentences instead of 1 complicated one. Her readers don't want to be impressed by her syntax. They want to understand her argument, and the clearest argument is always the most persuasive one. What about you? Which of these 3 learners do you identify with most? Is your challenge about register, like Camille, or organization, like Daniel, or sentence complexity, like May? Knowing your specific challenge is the first step toward fixing it. Think about it, and then practice specifically on that area. So here we are. You've been listening and learning for a long time today, and I hope, genuinely, I really hope, that you're leaving this lesson feeling like you understand report writing in English in a way you didn't before. Not just the theory, but the actual language, the words, the structures, the logic, the way a good report sounds and feels when you're reading it. This is English in Advance, and this is what we do here. We go deep, we go slow, we make sure you understand. Because language learning is not about ticking boxes or memorizing rules. It's about building real skills that you can use in real situations. And report writing is absolutely one of those skills. Before you go, and I mean this, please don't skip this part. Subscribe to English in Advance if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next lesson. Share this with a friend who's learning English because honestly, this kind of content is better when you're working through it with someone. Come and find us on social media and tell me, which of today's learners did you connect with most? Was it Camille, Daniel, or May? Let me know. I read every single comment, and I love hearing from you. And if you want to keep practicing right now, write a short report on something you know. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just try. Use the structures, use the vocabulary, and come back and share it with us. This has been English in Advance. I'm Jessica. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You're doing the work, and the work pays off every single time. Keep going, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Extra practice section. report writing scenarios and model sentences. I want to give you some additional practice material before we completely finish, because I know some of you are going to listen to this again, or you're going to share specific parts with someone who's studying, and I want to make sure there's as much useful content here as possible. So let's do some more work. Let me walk you through 5 different report writing scenarios, and for each one, I'm going to show you how to express the key information in formal report language. Think of this as a reference section. You can come back to this part whenever you need to. Scenario 1. You work at a hotel and you need to write a short report about the results of a guest satisfaction survey. Key information. 312 guests responded. 84% rated their stay as good or excellent. The most common complaints were about slow room service and noisy air conditioning units. Most guests said they would return. Here's how you might express some of this in a report. A total of 312 guest satisfaction surveys were completed during the January to March period. The results were broadly positive. 84% of respondents rated their stay as either good or excellent, indicating a high overall level of guest satisfaction. However, 2 recurring concerns were identified. Room service was cited as unsatisfactory by 31% of respondents, with the most common complaint relating to lengthy wait times during evening hours. Additionally, noise from air conditioning units was reported as a source of disruption by 24% of guests, particularly those accommodated on the upper floors. Despite these issues, 91% of respondents indicated that they would be willing to return, suggesting that overall the hotel is meeting guest expectations, though targeted improvements to room service efficiency and air conditioning maintenance are advised. Do you see how even simple data becomes sophisticated and professional when it's expressed using the right language? Broadly positive. Recurring concerns, cited as unsatisfactory, the most common complaint relating to, a source of disruption, targeted improvements. These aren't complicated ideas, they're ordinary ideas dressed in formal language. Scenario 2. You're a university student writing a report on the environmental impact of your campus. Key information. The university uses a lot of plastic. There's no recycling in some buildings. Many students don't know about the sustainability policy. A student survey showed 89% want more sustainability initiatives. Report language version. An assessment of the university's current environmental practices reveals several areas of concern. Plastic usage across campus remains high, with single-use items widely available in catering outlets and not subject to any formal restriction policy. Furthermore, recycling facilities are not consistently available across all campus buildings, leading to a situation where waste disposal practices vary considerably from one location to another. Awareness of the university's existing sustainability policy also appears to be limited among the student body. A survey of 400 undergraduate students found that only 23% were aware of the policy's existence, and fewer than 10% were able to identify its key commitments. In contrast, 89% of respondents expressed a desire for the university to introduce more visible and meaningful sustainability initiatives, suggesting that there is considerable appetite for change among the student population. Scenario 3. A report section on the financial performance of a small business. Key information. Revenue increased by 12% this year. Operating costs also rose by 9%. Net profit grew, but more slowly than expected. Online sales were the biggest growth area. Report language version. Financial performance during the current fiscal year showed overall improvement, though results were somewhat below initial projections. Revenue increased by 12% compared with the previous year, driven primarily by strong growth in the online sales channel, which expanded by 27% year-on-year. However, operating costs also rose during this period, increasing by 9% due in part to higher logistics expenses and the recruitment of 3 additional members of staff. As a result, net profit growth, while positive, was more modest than anticipated, expanding by approximately 6% rather than the projected 10%. It is recommended that the board consider whether further operational efficiencies can be identified to ensure that profit growth keeps pace with rising revenue in the coming year. Scenario 4. A workplace health and safety report section. Key information. There were 8 minor accidents in the warehouse last year. Most happened near the loading bay. 5 of the 8 involved slipping on wet surfaces. No proper wet floor signs were used. Report language version. Health and safety records indicate that 8 minor accidents were recorded in the warehouse facility during the previous calendar year, a figure that represents a 33% increase on the 4 accidents reported in the year prior. The majority of incidents, 5 of the 8, occurred in the vicinity of the loading bay and involved employees slipping on wet or damp flooring surfaces. A review of incident reports suggests that in none of these 5 cases was appropriate wet floor signage in place at the time of the accident. This represents a clear breach of standard health and safety protocol and is identified as the primary preventable cause of the injuries sustained. It is strongly recommended that wet floor signage be made mandatory in all areas of the loading bay whenever cleaning or unloading activities are taking place. Scenario 5. An academic report on reading habits among teenagers. Key information. A study of 500 teenagers showed that 61% read fewer than 2 books per year. Most said they preferred digital content. Teachers reported that reading comprehension test scores had declined. There is a link between low reading frequency and lower academic performance. Report language version. A study involving 500 secondary school students found that 61% reported reading fewer than 2 books per year outside of school requirements. When asked to explain their preferences, the majority of respondents indicated that they favored digital content, including social media, streaming services, and online video, over traditional print media. This finding is consistent with broader national trends observed in recent years. Parallel data collected from teachers suggests that this shift in reading habits may be having a measurable impact on academic outcomes. Reading comprehension test scores across the schools included in this study declined by an average of 8% over the past 3 years, a period that coincides with the significant rise in smartphone usage among this age group. While it would be an oversimplification to attribute declining comprehension scores solely to reduced book reading, the correlation between low reading frequency and lower overall academic performance is sufficiently strong to warrant further investigation and targeted intervention. There we go. 5 scenarios, 5 model passages, all demonstrating B2 level report writing in action. Study these. Notice the patterns. Copy the structures. Make them your own. A few final thoughts before we're completely done for today. Something I want you to remember is that becoming a good writer in any language takes time. It takes exposure, it takes practice, it takes feedback, and it takes patience. Even native speakers of English who are professionals, lawyers, journalists, researchers, managers, spend years developing their writing. So if your first draft of a report isn't perfect, that's completely fine. That's expected. The goal is to keep improving, one draft at a time. Also remember that the skills you're developing in report writing don't stay locked away in a box labeled formal writing. They spread. When you learn to organize your ideas clearly for a report, you also get better at organizing your thoughts in presentations and meetings. When you learn to use precise vocabulary, your general English becomes sharper. When you learn to express complex ideas with clarity, everything you write, even casual emails, improves. Report writing is a lever that lifts everything. And finally, and I want to say this directly to you, the person listening right now, the fact that you've stayed with this lesson for this long says something really positive about where you are in your learning journey. Most people give up on long-form content. They skip to the summary. They look for shortcuts. You didn't. You sat with the material, you worked through it, you practiced alongside Camille, Daniel, and May. That's what serious learners do, and serious learners get results. Thank you for being here at English in Advance. I mean it every time I say it. This channel exists because of listeners like you. Your commitment to improving your English is what keeps us going. My name is Jessica. Stay curious, stay consistent, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Take care. Extended language focus. Common mistakes and how to fix them. Before we truly wrap up, I want to address some of the most frequent mistakes that B2 learners make in report writing, because I've seen these patterns come up again and again, not just with Camille, Daniel, and May, but with hundreds of learners at this level. Knowing the mistakes in advance means you can avoid them before they become habits. The first common mistake is mixing verb tenses inconsistently. This is a big one. In reports, the tense you use depends on what you're describing. When you're talking about what happened in the past, what the survey showed, what the data revealed, what happened last quarter, you use the past simple. The survey revealed. Sales declined. Employees reported. When you're talking about current facts or the current situation, you use the present simple. The company operates 3 warehouses. Staff turnover remains high. When you're talking about what should happen in the future, your recommendations, you use modal verbs like should, would, could, or structures like it is recommended that with the present subjunctive. The mistake learners make is jumping between tenses without a clear reason. They write, the survey revealed that customer satisfaction is declining and the company should have done something. That sentence has 3 different time orientations in one: past, present, and past modal. And it creates confusion for the reader. Be consistent and intentional with your tenses. The second common mistake is using the wrong reporting verb. In English, different verbs for reporting information carry different meanings, and mixing them up can change the sense of your sentence in ways you don't intend. The data shows is neutral and direct. The data suggests implies a degree of uncertainty. The data confirms implies that this was already expected or suspected. The data reveals implies something was hidden or unknown before. The data indicates is similar to suggests, pointing in a direction without certainty. So if you write, The data confirms that customers are unhappy. You're implying this was already known. If you write, the data reveals that customers are unhappy, you're implying this is a new discovery. Choose carefully. The third common mistake is writing recommendations that are too vague. This is Daniel's problem. He writes things like, the company should improve its customer service, or management should consider doing better communication. These statements are true, maybe, but they're practically useless as recommendations. They tell the reader nothing actionable. They don't explain what specifically needs to change, how it should change, who should be responsible, or when it should happen. Compare that to, it is recommended that the customer service team be provided with targeted training in complaint resolution techniques by the end of the second quarter. A minimum of 2 training sessions should be scheduled, facilitated by an external specialist, and the results should be evaluated through a follow-up customer satisfaction survey, conducted 6 months after the training is complete. Now that is a recommendation. It's specific about what to do, how to do it, who does it, and how to measure whether it worked. Aim for that level of specificity every time. The fourth common mistake is writing a conclusion that just repeats the introduction. This happens when the writer isn't sure what to say, so they simply restate what they said at the beginning. This report was written to investigate customer satisfaction. As we can see, there are several problems with customer satisfaction. That tells the reader nothing new and wastes their time. The conclusion should synthesize. It should pull together the findings, show how they connect, and point to what needs to happen. It should feel like the logical endpoint of everything the report has been building toward. The fifth common mistake is ignoring paragraph structure. In a report, each paragraph should have one main idea. You introduce the idea, you support it with evidence or explanation, and then you either conclude it or transition to the next idea. When learners stuff multiple ideas into one paragraph, especially when those ideas are only loosely related, the paragraph becomes hard to follow and the report loses its organization. A useful test. After writing each paragraph, ask yourself, what is the one main idea of this paragraph? If you can answer in one clear sentence, the paragraph is well focused. If you find yourself saying, well, it's about this, and also about this other thing, and there's also this point about, it's time to split the paragraph. The sixth mistake is starting too many sentences with this. This is a problem. This shows that this was because, this led to. When every sentence begins with this, the writing feels flat and repetitive. Use varied sentence openings. Start with a time reference. During the second quarter. Start with a cause. As a result of the staffing shortage. Start with the subject of the finding. Customer complaints increased. Start with a data point. 62% of respondents reported. Variety in how you open your sentences keeps the reader engaged. Deep dive. Understanding B2 report. Writing an exam. Contexts. Now let me talk specifically to those of you who are preparing for English language exams, specifically Cambridge B2 First or B2 level university writing assessments. Because report writing is one of the most commonly tested writing tasks at this level, and there are some specific things examiners look for that you need to know. In the Cambridge B2 First writing paper, if you choose to write a report, you're typically given a scenario with some specific information, maybe the results of a survey or a description of a situation. and you're asked to write a report for a specific reader. The task usually specifies what you need to include and who you're writing for. Your job is to write a clear, organized, formal report that addresses all the points in the task. Examiners at B2 level are looking for 4 main things: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. Content means you've addressed all the points the task asked you to cover. You haven't ignored anything, and you haven't added irrelevant information. Read the task carefully and tick off each requirement as you include it. Communicative achievement means your report achieves its purpose. It communicates the information effectively and is written in the right style for the audience. A report addressed to a manager should sound professional and objective. A report addressed to classmates for a school project might be slightly less formal, but still organized and clear. Organization means your report has a clear structure. Introduction, body sections, conclusion, and possibly recommendations, and flows logically from one section to the next. Examiners can tell within the first paragraph whether a writer understands how reports are organized. Language means you're using a wide enough range of vocabulary and structures with accuracy. This is where all the vocabulary and structures we've practiced today become your scoring opportunities. Use formal vocabulary correctly. Use the passive voice appropriately. Use hedging language. Use a variety of sentence structures. Demonstrate that you have the language tools to express complex ideas clearly. One specific tip for exam reports: always use section headings. Even if the examiner doesn't specifically require them, section headings show organization clearly and help the examiner find each piece of content you've included. They also break the text up visually, which makes it easier to read and signals that you understand the genre. Another tip: plan before you write. In an exam context, spending 5 minutes planning means the actual writing goes much faster and the result is much more organized. Your plan doesn't need to be elaborate. Just a quick note of what goes in each section. Introduction: purpose, scope, method. Section 1, finding one with data. Section 2, finding two with data. Recommendations: 2 or 3 specific actions. Conclusion, summary, significance. That's enough. Then write. And a final exam tip: write in formal English from the first word to the last. Don't let contractions slip in. Don't let casual vocabulary sneak through. Stay consistent in your register all the way through the report. Inconsistent register is one of the most common reasons B2 learners lose marks on writing tasks. All right, that is everything I have for you today. And I mean that sincerely. That is genuinely everything. We have covered what reports are and why they matter. We've looked at 5 different types. We've gone through the full structure from title to conclusion. We've practiced vocabulary for presenting data, explaining causes, making recommendations, and expressing uncertainty. We've heard model passages, worked through errors, done comprehension practice, and looked at exam-specific advice. You've listened to real examples of B2 level language in action. You've heard how Camille, Daniel, and May struggled and improved. And you've been given a full toolkit of vocabulary and structures you can use immediately. This is a lot. I know it's a lot. And if you need to go back and listen to any section again, please do. That's not a sign of weakness. It's smart studying. The brain learns through repetition, through active engagement, and through hearing things in context. That's exactly what today has been. I'm Jessica. This is English in Advance. And until next time, write clearly, Write confidently and remember that every sentence you practice brings you one step closer to where you want to be. See you soon.